Jessica Serrano never imagined that one of the worst nights of her life had only just begun. By the time police arrived at her home, she was already in full panic. She had called because something felt wrong. Very wrong. Her ex-boyfriend, Joseph Castina, was not supposed to be anywhere near that house. There was a protective order in place. He had no legal right to be there, no reason to be there, and yet Jessica believed he had been inside. She had found his things hidden in her closet. His jacket. His jeans. His keys. To Jessica, that meant only one thing. Joseph had been there, and he may still have been there. At first, the call sounded like a woman afraid that her violent ex might be hiding somewhere inside her home. That alone was terrifying enough. But within moments, the situation exploded into something much worse. Before officers could even fully respond, gunshots rang out inside the house. Suddenly, this was no longer just a domestic disturbance call. It was an active massacre. Jessica was trapped inside her own home, hiding, trying to stay alive while chaos erupted around her. Over the phone, dispatch tried to keep her calm, tried to keep her talking, tried to understand what was happening. But in a moment like that, words start breaking apart. Breathing becomes shaky. Thoughts become scrambled. The only thing that matters is survival. Somewhere inside that house, Joseph Castina had begun carrying out a deadly attack. Jessica could hear the shots. She could hear screaming in the background. She knew people inside were in danger, but she also knew she could be next. She locked herself away in the bathroom, hoping maybe she could stay hidden, maybe police would arrive in time, maybe somehow she would make it out. But Joseph was not finished. After shooting other members of the family, he came for her. He made his way to the bathroom, targeting what he likely believed would be his final victim that night. Jessica was now face to face with the man she had once been in a relationship with, the father of her children, the same man she had already tried to legally protect herself from. There are moments in crime stories where survival comes down to one split-second decision. For Jessica, this was that moment. When Joseph kicked open the bathroom door, Jessica fought back. She managed to grab him and shove him into the bathtub. It was enough to create the smallest opening, the smallest chance, and she took it. She ran. She bolted out of the room, out of immediate danger, desperate to escape the house that had just turned into a slaughter scene. But Joseph was right behind her. He chased her through the backyard, then back toward the house, then out into the street. Jessica tried to flag down a passing car. It kept going. That detail alone is chilling. In the middle of the horror, in the middle of a desperate attempt to survive, help was right there for a second and then gone. She was still on her own. Then the two split. Jessica ran south. Joseph ran north. And just then, Sergeant Paul Davis arrived. Jessica ran toward him in total panic and told him the words no officer wants to hear at a scene like this: "He shot my family." In that instant, the situation became horrifyingly clear. This was not an attempted attack. This was not a threat that had almost turned violent. This was the aftermath of a mass killing, and the killer had just fled on foot. As officers moved into the house, they were met with a nightmare. Inside, 3 members of the Serrano family had already been murdered. Jessica's twin sister, Maria Anna, had been shot twice and killed. Maria Anna's husband, Ken Green, was found near the basement stairs. He had been shot once and was believed to be the first victim Joseph encountered that night. Jessica's father, Jesus Serrano, was also found dead in the hallway, shot twice. And then outside, in the backyard, officers discovered a 4th victim. A family friend named Rudulo Perez, who had been renting a camper from the Serrano family, had also been killed. In a matter of moments, 4 lives had been taken. 4 people were dead. Jessica had only narrowly survived. And Joseph Castina was gone. That is what made this case even more dangerous. Police were no longer just dealing with a homicide scene. They were dealing with a manhunt for an armed killer who had just murdered 4 people and tried to kill a 5th. And to understand how everything reached this point, you have to look at the relationship between Jessica and Joseph. Jessica and Joseph had a long and deeply toxic history. They were never married, but they shared 2 children together. Over the previous 2 years, their relationship had been marked by instability, violence, breakups, and repeated attempts to pull away from each other only to end up drawn back into conflict again. It was the kind of relationship that becomes more dangerous each time the cycle repeats. According to reports in the case, Joseph harassed Jessica in manipulative ways. He created fake Facebook accounts to contact her. If she agreed to meet someone she thought was a new romantic interest, she would later discover it had actually been Joseph behind the messages. That kind of deception speaks to obsession, control, and a refusal to let go. And this was not just emotional chaos. Some of those conflicts became so serious that Child Protective Services had to step in to make sure the children were safe. That tells you this was not just a messy breakup. Authorities were already seeing warning signs serious enough to involve child welfare. And then, only 1 week before the killings, the situation escalated again. Jessica and her father obtained a protective order against Joseph after an especially disturbing incident. He had smashed the windows of Jessica's car, pulled her into his own vehicle, held her there for a time, and threatened her with a gun. That is a massive escalation. By then, the danger was clear enough that legal protection was put in place. Joseph was specifically forbidden from being near Jessica and her family. But protective orders only work when the person being restrained is willing to obey the law. Joseph wasn't. On the night of the murders, he ignored that order completely. He broke into the house with a gun and waited for the family to return from a party. That detail is especially disturbing because it shows planning. He did not just randomly explode in the heat of the moment after an argument. He went there armed. He entered the home unlawfully. He waited. That suggests intent. When the family returned, Joseph was already there, hidden inside, ready to attack. Before the gunshots ever started, Jessica had already sensed that something was off. Finding his clothes and keys in the closet must have felt like proof that her worst fears were true. And sadly, they were. When police first got involved, there may still have been a slim hope that Joseph was hiding and that officers might catch him before anything happened. But there was no time. The violence began before help could get there. And while officers worked to secure the house after the killings, another urgent concern emerged. There were children inside. Maria Anna's 2 little girls were still in the home, and officers had to figure out how to get them out without exposing them to the horrifying scene around them. That part of the response says a lot about the human side of this case. Even amid bloodshed and panic, officers were trying to shield those children from seeing what had happened to their mother. They discussed covering them with blankets and moving them carefully out of the home. Jessica and the children were taken to the hospital. Thankfully, none of them had physical injuries. But emotionally, this was the kind of trauma that would leave permanent damage. At that point, Jessica was not only a survivor. She was a witness to the destruction of her own family. And still, there was no closure. Joseph had escaped. Police believed that because he had fled on foot and was barefoot, he could not have gotten far. Their first thought was obvious: check places he might go. His own house. His parents' house. Anywhere nearby where family might help him hide. The neighborhood was quickly locked down. Sergeant Davis and other officers, including a K-9 team, went to Joseph's family home. They spoke with relatives and made it clear that they wanted to find him before things got worse. Officers told the family directly that they would rather take Joseph into custody alive than have him end up dead if he did something else reckless. That is the reality police were facing. A man who had just murdered 4 people might still be armed, still unstable, and still capable of more violence. Meanwhile, investigators were tracking Joseph's cell phone. The pings showed he was somewhere within a roughly 900-meter radius of the Serrano home. That area included his parents' house, which made the search there even more urgent. His burgundy H2 Hummer was also found parked on a street between the Serrano home and his parents' house. At first glance, it looked like the net might be closing around him. Officers searched the family home. AK-19 went in first. They swept room by room. But Joseph was not there. Somehow, despite the lockdown and the immediate police response, he had slipped through. That is one of the most unsettling parts of this case. He committed a quadruple murder, fled barefoot, left behind critical personal items, and still managed to disappear. As the search continued, neighbors reported strange activity in the area during the early hours. There were reports of a loud truck moving through blocked streets and even gunshots that may have served as a diversion. It raised the possibility that Joseph had help getting away. Then another key detail emerged. His cell phone, which police had been tracking, was eventually found in the backyard of the Serrano home. That discovery suggested Joseph may have returned through the property, climbed a fence, and then vanished into the neighborhood. If that's what happened, he deliberately ditched the phone to make tracking him harder. A reverse 911 alert was sent out to residents, warning them to stay inside because an armed and dangerous man was loose in the area. Back at the crime scene, investigators kept piecing together what had happened. They recovered the murder weapon and 9 shell casings. The gun was a 9mm Kimber, and fingerprints confirmed it belonged to Joseph Castina. The casings were also linked to evidence from an earlier stolen car case. The firearm itself had been purchased in Iowa in 2016 before later being reported stolen. Then another piece of the larger picture came into focus. Reports showed that Joseph and Jessica's children had been taken out of state just 1 day before the massacre by Child Protective Services and sent to Texas. Investigators believed that could have been the trigger for Joseph's rampage. If that was the case, then the murders may have been fueled by his anger over losing control and access to his children. That theory also lined up with later reports that family members believed he was upset about not having custody. Still, motive alone does not explain how he vanished so effectively. Police began considering whether Joseph may have been trying to get to Texas, possibly to reclaim the children. Another possibility was Mexico, where he had family and where he had traveled the year before for his grandfather's funeral. But there was one big problem with both theories. Joseph had left behind his vehicle, his wallet, his ID, his debit card, and 2 credit cards. On paper, he should not have been able to get far at all. That made investigators look even harder at the possibility of outside help. And that is where the case took another turn. Once Joseph's name and image spread across Aurora and the Denver metro area, tips started flooding in. The most important tip came from his cousin, Joel. Joel told police that on the morning of the murders, Joseph had shown up at his house asking to stay there. According to Joel, Joseph looked nervous, unstable, and clearly not right. Joel refused to let him inside, but he did give him a pair of green sneakers and told him to leave. That detail matters because Joseph had fled barefoot. Joel also told police that Joseph seemed high and kept repeating the phrase, "I'm up." That encounter was a huge break in the case. It showed Joseph was moving around and seeking help from relatives. It also reinforced the idea that he had managed to travel farther than expected despite having almost none of his personal belongings with him. As investigators dug deeper, suspicion started to fall on Joseph's brothers. One brother had a solid alibi. But the younger brother, Juan Anel, would not cooperate. He refused to talk. And the more resistant he became, the more suspicious police got. Eventually, under pressure, the truth came out. Juan had not only helped Joseph after the killings, he had actually played a role in his escape. Authorities learned that he drove Joseph to the Serrano residence, and later transported him to Denver, where he handed him off to another relative, their cousin Carlos Flores. That revelation changed the scope of the case. This was no longer just about a fugitive killer disappearing on his own. Joseph had help. Family members had assisted him after the murders. Juan was arrested and charged as an accessory after the fact to 4 murders. Then law enforcement moved on Carlos Flores. When they questioned him, Carlos admitted he had also helped Joseph. He said he had tried to pass him off to other relatives, but nobody else wanted to take him in. Eventually, Carlos claimed he left Joseph somewhere at night with some blankets and cash, then drove away without knowing exactly what Joseph planned to do next. Carlos, too, was charged as an accessory after the fact. Now the picture was becoming much clearer. Joseph had not escaped purely through luck. He had been moved and assisted by people close to him. Even if those relatives did not carry out the killings themselves, their actions bought him time, distance, and opportunity. And that delay turned the case into something far bigger than a local manhunt. It became international. It took around 45 days for investigators, working with the FBI, Mexican immigration authorities, and federal police, to finally track Joseph down. The first lead placed him in Zacatecas, in north-central Mexico, where he reportedly sought refuge with relatives. But according to the case information, those relatives refused to help him because of family tensions and old conflicts. Instead, they alerted authorities. That forced Joseph to move again. He then traveled to Aguascalientes. But by then, the pressure was closing in. On December 10, 2022, local police identified and arrested him, finally bringing the manhunt to an end. After more than a month on the run, Joseph Castina was finally in custody. He was later extradited back to the United States and turned over to law enforcement. He was taken to Phoenix, Arizona, while awaiting transport back to Colorado. Investigators from the Aurora Police Department flew there to interview him as quickly as possible. And when they sat down with him, they tried to get his side of the story. Joseph said he would feel more comfortable speaking with an attorney. He mentioned that what he had seen in the news was totally different from his side, suggesting he believed there was another version of events. But when investigators tried to continue, he pulled back and made it clear he did not want to fully talk without legal representation. So the interview went nowhere meaningful. Whatever explanation he may have wanted to give, he did not give it then. But by that point, the evidence against him was already overwhelming. The protective order. The history of violence. The murder weapon. The fingerprints. The witness statements. The escape route. The family assistance. The international arrest. The case moved forward. Nearly 2 years later, on May 16, 2024, Joseph stood trial in Arapahoe County. He was found guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. That attempted murder charge was for Jessica. She had survived only because, in the most desperate moment imaginable, she fought back and ran. In September 2024, Joseph was sentenced. The judge handed down 4 life sentences plus an additional 24 years. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. And even that sentence cannot undo what happened inside that house. Jessica lost her twin sister. Children lost their mother. A husband was killed. A father was killed. A family friend was killed. and 4 children were left to grow up in the shadow of a single night of unimaginable violence. This case is another reminder that the warning signs in abusive relationships are often there long before the worst happens. The manipulation, the threats, the stalking behavior, the fake social media accounts, the destruction of property, the gun threats, the protective order. None of those things were small. And when a person with that history decides they have lost control, the consequences can be catastrophic. Jessica Serrano survived, but survival does not mean escape from trauma. She had to live through the murder of her family, the attempted murder of herself, and the terrifying knowledge that the man responsible vanished into the night before eventually being hunted down across borders. For the victims, there is no justice that feels complete. There is only accountability, and the hope that the sentence ensures Joseph Castina will never hurt anyone again. One night destroyed 2 families forever. 4 people were murdered. 1 woman barely made it out alive. And the man who caused it all ran until there was nowhere left to hide. May the victims rest in peace.